The United States Supreme Court delivered a momentous decision this week. It marked a significant check on the scope of presidential authority. The justices voted 7-2 to halt the enforcement of a wide range of executive orders. This ruling sends a clear message about the constitutional limits of executive power. The decision immediately stays, or pauses, the implementation of more than 70 directives issued by the White House. This decisive action underscores a fundamental conflict between the executive branch and the judiciary, a tension that has been building for several years. The court's intervention signals a reassertion of its role as a co-equal branch of government, tasked with interpreting the law and upholding the Constitution. The ruling represents a powerful rebuke of the executive branch's recent assertions of unilateral power. At the heart of the matter were claims of total authority made by the administration. The court found these claims to be inconsistent with the nation's foundational legal principles. The majority opinion, authored by the Chief Justice, carefully delineated the boundaries that separate presidential power from the powers granted to Congress and reserved for the states. The High Court's definitive statement aims to resolve legal uncertainty with a firm defense of constitutional structure and is characterized as the biggest judicial check on a sitting president in decades, establishing a major precedent that limits presidential power for future administrations. The Supreme Court's ruling directly confronted and rejected the administration's assertion of nearly unlimited authority. The justices specifically dismantled the legal argument that the executive branch could operate without checks from the other branches of government. A key element struck down was the claim of total authority to direct the internal affairs of the nation through executive fiat. This concept, the court explained, has no basis in constitutional law. The majority opinion emphasized that the president's power, while substantial, is not absolute. It is constrained by the powers explicitly granted to Congress and the courts, a foundational concept known as the separation of powers. Another critical component was the court's firm block on the federalization of state National Guard units for domestic law enforcement without gubernatorial consent. The court disagreed with unilateral federal control, siding with states that challenged this unprecedented overreach. The justices affirmed the Guard's dual federal and state command structure and deemed forced domestic deployments a violation of state sovereignty. This directly addresses ongoing legal battles reported in California and Illinois and places significant limits on universal injunctions, warning that nationwide blocks should be exceedingly rare and not set national policy from a single district court. A central pillar of the Supreme Court's landmark ruling was its decisive stance on the federalization of the state National Guard. The court declared that the president does not have the unilateral authority to command state National Guard units for domestic missions without the consent of the state's governor. This directly addressed a major point of contention between the federal government and several states. The administration had argued that, as commander-in-chief, the president could federalize Guard troops at will. The court upheld the principle of state sovereignty and the Guard's dual command structure that has existed for over a century. The justices pointed to constitutional text and federal statutes to support their conclusion. The Guard is unique. Members serve under their governors unless lawfully called into federal service for constitutionally enumerated purposes like repelling an invasion or executing federal law. Using them for general domestic law enforcement without a governor's approval was an overstep. The ruling validated challenges documented by CA.gov and similar litigation in other states. The claim that Guard deployment decisions were not judicially reviewable was firmly rejected. The court reaffirmed jurisdiction to review alleged executive overreach in military command. This preserves the Guard's traditional role responding to local needs, natural disasters, civil disturbances, and other state emergencies under state control. Going forward, Washington must negotiate and cooperate with states. Federal call-up requires proper legal authority and, absent extraordinary circumstances, state consent. The ripple effect, immediate consequences of the ruling. With more than 70 executive orders now stayed, parts of the federal government face administrative paralysis. Agencies have hit the brakes, creating confusion and operational disruption. An order calling for mass reductions in the federal workforce, previously cleared, is now frozen. leaving workers in limbo. States, by contrast, gained immediate relief. Control over their guard units is unequivocally reaffirmed. Leaders can plan for disasters and civil unrest without fear of unilateral federal commandeering. The court narrowed the use of universal injunctions, nationwide blocks by a single judge, reserving them for exceptional cases. Expect a patchwork of rulings as appeals percolate across circuits before reaching the High Court. Ironically, while striking down numerous orders, the court also curbed judicial overreach critiques long voiced by the administration. The decision shifts major policymaking back toward Congress, negotiation, compromise, and formal legislation. Future presidents of any party will think twice before using unilateral orders to bypass the legislative process. Politically, the ruling will animate media debates, campaigns, and confirmation battles for years. Beyond the moment, it sets a powerful precedent that constrains executive authority and clarifies judicial remedies. Section 9. A defining moment. The enduring legacy of the decision. This is a defining moment for the balance of power in American government. Its legacy will be measured not in the number of orders paused, but in the strength of the constitutional guardrails it reinforced. By rejecting claims of total authority and reaffirming separation of powers, the court drew a bright line against executive overreach. This decision will be studied and cited for decades on the limits of presidential power. A broad cross-ideological majority underscored that fundamental constitutional structure can unify the court's voice. By protecting state control over the National Guard, the ruling breathes new life into federalism and state sovereignty. States are affirmed as sovereign partners, not mere subdivisions, in our federal system. Next, lower courts will reevaluate state orders under a stricter framework. Many may be voided. Major policy now returns to the hard work of consensus building and passing legislation. The judiciary reasserts its role, policing the boundaries between branches, even in national security contexts. In the end, the court defends a constitutional design that is deliberative and balanced, the nation's bulwark against the concentration of unchecked authority. That's basically the point.